What happens when one of Hollywood's most outspoken actors sits down with one of daytime television's most controversial hosts and everything goes completely off the rails? Well, you're about to find out because Eric Roberts just got kicked off The View after an absolutely explosive confrontation with Joy Behar that nobody saw coming. Make sure you subscribe and drop a comment below because this story is going to blow your mind. It was supposed to be a routine promotional appearance. Eric Roberts, the veteran actor with over 400 film and television credits to his name, was scheduled to discuss his latest independent film project. The producers had briefed him on the typical format, the usual softball questions about his career, maybe some light banter about his famous sister Julia, and a few minutes to plug his new movie. What they didn't prepare him for was Joy Behar in one of her most combative moods. The trouble started almost immediately after the commercial break. As the cameras rolled and the audience settled into their seats, Joy leaned forward with that familiar smirk that regular viewers know all too well. Instead of the warm welcome most guests receive, she jumped straight into attack mode. "So Eric," Joy began, her voice dripping with barely concealed disdain, "I have to ask about your recent comments regarding the current state of Hollywood. Some people are saying you're becoming quite the conspiracy theorist these days." Eric's eyebrows shot up. This wasn't what they had discussed during the pre-interview. "I'm sorry, what comments are you referring to exactly?" "Oh, come on, don't play dumb with us," Joy shot back, shuffling through some papers on her desk. "You've been making some pretty wild claims about how certain political agendas are influencing casting decisions in major studios. Some might call that paranoid thinking." The other co-hosts shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Sunny Hostin glanced nervously between Joy and Eric, while Sarah Haynes looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. This was clearly not the direction anyone had expected the interview to take. Eric straightened in his chair, his jaw tightening slightly. "First of all, Joy, I never used the word conspiracy. What I said in that interview was that there are definitely political considerations that go into casting decisions these days, and I think that's something worth discussing honestly." Right, Joy interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. "But isn't that just your way of complaining that you're not getting the roles you used to get? I mean, let's be honest here, you're not exactly the leading man type anymore." The audience let out a collective gasp. Even by Joy's standards, this was unusually harsh. Eric's face flushed red, but he maintained his composure. "That's an interesting way to frame it," Eric replied, his voice steady but with an edge. "But I think you're missing the point entirely. This isn't about me personally. It's about the industry as a whole and how political correctness has become more important than actual talent or storytelling." Joy leaned back in her chair, clearly pleased with herself for getting under his skin. "Oh, so now we're talking about political correctness? That's usually code for I can't say whatever I want without consequences anymore." "No, that's not what I'm saying at all," Eric responded, his patience clearly wearing thin. "What I'm saying is that we've created an environment where people are more concerned about checking boxes than they are about creating authentic, compelling characters and stories." The tension in the studio was palpable. Whoopi Goldberg, who had been relatively quiet up to this point, tried to interject. "Well, I think what Eric might be trying to say is, I can speak for myself, thank you." Eric cut her off, his eyes never leaving Joy's face. "And what I'm saying is that Joy here is demonstrating exactly the kind of close-minded thinking that's stifling creativity in this business." Joy's mouth fell open. "Excuse me? Close-minded? I think you've got that backwards, buddy. I'm the one trying to have an honest conversation here while you're spouting off about some imaginary war on talent." "Imaginary?" Eric laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Tell that to the dozens of actors and writers I know who've been blacklisted for having the wrong political opinions. Tell that to the screenwriters who've had their projects shelved because they didn't include enough diversity quotas." The co-hosts were now exchanging worried glances. This was spiraling out of control fast, and they all knew it. Joy, however, seemed to be enjoying every minute of it. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "You're talking about diversity like it's a bad thing. God forbid we actually give opportunities to people who haven't had them for decades." "That's not what I'm saying, and you know it," Eric shot back, his voice rising. "I'm all for giving everyone a fair shot, but when you start making decisions based solely on race or gender instead of merit, you're doing a disservice to everyone involved." Joy's eyes lit up with malicious glee. "So you think white men are being discriminated against now? Is that what you're telling me?" Eric stood up from his chair, towering over the panel. "You know what, Joy? This is exactly what I'm talking about. Instead of actually listening to what I'm saying, you're twisting my words and putting labels on me. This is the problem with discourse in this country right now. Sir, please sit down, one of the producers called out from off camera, but Eric ignored him. No, I'm not going to sit down and let her misrepresent everything I'm saying, Eric declared, pointing directly at Joy. This woman invited me on her show under false pretenses and is now trying to make me look like some kind of bigot for expressing legitimate concerns about the industry I've worked in for over 40 years. Joy was practically glowing with satisfaction. Well, if the shoe fits... Don't you dare, Eric interrupted, his voice like thunder. Don't you dare try to paint me as something I'm not. I've worked with people of every race, religion, and background you can imagine, and I've never judged anyone by anything other than their talent and professionalism. The audience was completely silent now, unsure whether they should be applauding or calling security. The co-hosts looked like deer caught in headlights, and the producers were frantically gesturing from behind the cameras. Joy, sensing she had pushed him to the breaking point, decided to twist the knife a little deeper. You know what, Eric? I think you're just angry that Hollywood has moved on without you. The industry doesn't need angry old white men telling everyone else how things should be done anymore. That was the final straw. Eric's face went completely white, then deep red. For a moment, the entire studio held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and dangerous. Did you just call me an angry old white man? Eric asked, his words cutting through the silence like a blade. After everything I just said about not judging people based on their race or gender, you just reduced me to exactly that? Joy shrugged, completely unbothered by the nuclear bomb she had just detonated. Well, if you're going to act like one, I'm going to call it like I see it. Unbelievable, Eric muttered, shaking his head. You know what, Joy? You want to talk about anger? Let me tell you what makes me angry. What makes me angry is sitting across from someone who claims to be a champion of tolerance and equality, while simultaneously being the most intolerant, prejudiced person in the room. The other co-hosts were now frantically trying to regain control of the situation. Sonny jumped in desperately. Maybe we should take a step back here and... No, Eric cut her off again, his attention laser-focused on Joy. I want to finish this conversation. Because Joy here just perfectly illustrated everything that's wrong with the current state of discourse in this country. She invites me on her show, ambushes me with questions that have nothing to do with why I'm supposed to be here, twists everything I say to fit her narrative, and then when I defend myself, she resorts to racial and age-based insults. Joy rolled her eyes dramatically. Oh, please, you're being way too sensitive. I was just making an observation. An observation? Eric's voice cracked with incredulous laughter. You just dismissed everything I said based on my race, my gender, and my age, and you call that an observation? How is that any different from the discrimination you claim to be fighting against? Because it's not the same thing, Joy replied with infuriating smugness. When marginalized groups speak up, they're fighting for equality. When privileged groups complain, they're usually just whining about losing their advantages. Eric stared at her in complete disbelief. Did you really just say that? Did you really just tell me that my opinions don't matter because of the color of my skin? That's not what I said. Joy backtracked slightly, sensing she might have gone too far even for her standards. That's exactly what you said, Eric fired back. You literally just told me that my perspective is invalid because I'm white and male. How is that not racism and sexism? Whoopi tried once again to mediate. Look, I think we're all getting a little heated here. Maybe we should... Heated? Eric whirled around to face her. Whoopi, with all due respect, your colleague just told me that my voice doesn't matter because of my demographics, and you think the problem is that we're getting heated? Joy, apparently deciding that she hadn't dug herself deep enough into this hole, chose that moment to double down. You know what, Eric? Maybe if you spent less time complaining about imaginary problems and more time actually listening to people who face real discrimination, you might understand why nobody wants to hear your victim complex. The audience collectively gasped again. Even some of the production crew members were shaking their heads in disbelief. Sarah Haynes looked like she was about to burst into tears, and Sonny was frantically scribbling notes, probably trying to figure out how they were going to explain this to the network executives. Eric slowly turned back to face Joy, his expression now one of complete contempt. My victim complex? Lady, you've spent the last 10 minutes attacking me personally because I dared to suggest that maybe, just maybe, the industry I've worked in my entire adult life has some problems that are worth discussing honestly. And I've spent the last 10 minutes trying to get you to acknowledge that your problems are not the same as real discrimination, Joy shot back. Real discrimination? Eric's voice was now shaking with rage. You mean like judging someone's opinions based on their race and gender? You mean like dismissing someone's experiences because they don't fit your political narrative? You mean like exactly what you've been doing to me for the past 10 minutes? Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Eric wasn't finished. You want to talk about privilege, Joy? Let's talk about the privilege of sitting behind that desk and thinking you can treat your guests like garbage just because you disagree with them. Let's talk about the privilege of having a platform that reaches millions of people and using it to spread your toxic brand of divisiveness. Let's talk about the privilege of thinking you're morally superior to everyone who doesn't share your exact worldview. The studio was dead silent except for the hum of the cameras. Joy's confident smirk had finally started to fade as she realized that Eric wasn't backing down. You know what really gets me? Eric continued, his voice now calm but filled with steel. You started this interview by calling me a conspiracy theorist for suggesting that political considerations influence casting decisions. But what you've proven here today is that you can't even have a civil conversation with someone without immediately resorting to political attacks and personal insults. Joy tried to regain her composure. Look, Eric, I think you're taking this way too personally. Too personally? Eric interrupted with a bitter laugh. Joy, you've spent the last 15 minutes personally attacking me based on my race, my age, my gender, and my career. How exactly am I supposed to take that? I was just trying to challenge your assumptions, Joy replied weakly. No, you weren't, Eric said firmly. You were trying to humiliate me on national television because I said something that didn't align with your political beliefs. And when I pushed back, you resorted to the exact kind of discrimination you claimed to oppose. The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The producers were now openly gesturing for someone to do something, anything, to end this disaster before it got any worse. But Joy, in what would prove to be the biggest mistake of her career, decided to escalate one more time. You know what, Eric? I think we've heard enough of your privileged whining for one day. Why don't you take your hurt feelings and your outdated opinions and— She never got to finish that sentence. Eric stood up so fast, his chair rolled backward and crashed into the wall behind him. His face was a mask of controlled fury as he pointed directly at Joy's face. Don't you ever, and I mean ever, speak to me like that again? He said, his voice deadly quiet. I came here as your guest, and you've treated me with nothing but disrespect and contempt from the moment I sat down. The security guards were now moving toward the set, but Eric wasn't done yet. You want to know what privilege really looks like, Joy? It looks like thinking you can insult and degrade people on national television and face no consequences for it. Well, guess what? Today you picked the wrong person. Joy, finally realizing she had pushed things too far, tried to backtrack. Eric, maybe we should just— No, Eric cut her off one final time. We're done here. I wouldn't stay on this show for another second if you paid me. Eric began removing his microphone, his movements deliberate and controlled despite the rage burning in his eyes. The entire studio watched in stunned silence as he carefully unclipped the device from his shirt. Eric, please. Whoopi tried one last time to salvage the situation. Let's just take a breath here and— No, Whoopi, Eric said without looking at her, his attention focused on Joy, who was now looking decidedly less confident. There's no coming back from this. Your colleague here has shown her true colors, and frankly, I'm embarrassed for all of you that you have to sit next to her every day. Joy's face flushed with anger at being called out so directly. You don't get to come on my show and insult me, she snapped, her voice rising to a near shriek. Eric paused in his mic removal and looked at her with genuine amazement. Your show? Joy, this isn't your show. This is supposed to be a panel discussion where different viewpoints are respected. But you've turned it into your personal platform for attacking anyone who doesn't think exactly like you do. I was doing my job, Joy protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Your job? Eric laughed coldly. Your job is to interview guests, not to ambush them with personal attacks. Your job is to facilitate discussion, not to shut it down with insults and name-calling. Your job is to treat people with basic human decency, something you've completely failed to do today. The other co-hosts were now looking anywhere but at Joy or Eric. The audience was shifting uncomfortably in their seats, clearly sensing that they were witnessing something that was going to have serious consequences. Joy, perhaps realizing that her career might be on the line, made one last desperate attempt to regain control. You know what, Eric? If you can't handle a little pushback on your controversial opinions, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. That comment sealed her fate. Eric slowly placed his microphone on the table in front of him and turned to face Joy with a look of such complete disdain that she actually recoiled in her chair. "A little pushback?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying to every corner of the studio. "Joy, you called me an angry old white man. You told me my opinions don't matter because of my race and gender. You accused me of having a victim complex for defending myself against your attacks. You've been nothing but hostile and disrespectful from the moment this interview started." He gestured toward the audience and cameras. "And you did all of this in front of millions of people, thinking that your position behind that desk gives you the right to treat your guests like garbage." Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Eric held up a hand to stop her. "I'm not finished," he said firmly. "You want to talk about controversial opinions? Here's one for you. I think you're a bully who hides behind the guise of social justice to justify your cruel behavior. I think you're exactly the kind of person who's destroying civil discourse in this country. And I think anyone who enables your behavior is just as much a part of the problem." The studio was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Even the camera operators had stopped moving, afraid to make any noise that might break the tension. Eric turned to address the other co-hosts directly. "Ladies, I have nothing but respect for all of you. But I have to ask, how do you sit here day after day and watch this woman treat people this way? How do you justify being part of a show that claims to promote tolerance while hosting someone who's completely intolerant of anyone who disagrees with her?" Sunny started to speak, but Eric continued before she could get a word out. "Don't answer that. I already know. It's because speaking up would mean risking your own careers, and that's exactly how bullies like Joy maintain their power. They create an environment where everyone's too afraid to call them out on their behavior." Joy was now visibly shaking with rage. "You have no right to come on here and attack me like this?" Eric looked at her with something approaching pity. "Joy, everything I've said about you, I've supported with examples of your behavior from just the last 20 minutes. Everything you said about me was based on assumptions and prejudices. Do you really not see the difference?" He picked up his microphone from the table and handed it to a stunned production assistant. "You know what the most ironic part of all this is?" Eric continued, addressing Joy directly. "You started this interview by calling me a conspiracy theorist for suggesting that political agendas influence decision-making in Hollywood. But what you've demonstrated here today is exactly that kind of thinking. You couldn't separate the person from the politics. You couldn't have a rational discussion about ideas without making it personal." Eric began walking toward the edge of the set, but he wasn't done yet. "And the saddest part is that you probably think you won something here today. You probably think you put me in my place. But what you really did was prove every point I was trying to make about the toxic state of discourse in this industry and in this country." Joy, apparently unable to help herself, made one final, catastrophic mistake. "Well, don't let the door hit you on the way out," she called after him, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Eric stopped dead in his tracks. The entire studio seemed to hold its breath as he slowly turned around to face her one last time. "You know what, Joy?" he said, his voice now carrying a tone of finality. "I've been in this business for over 40 years. I've worked with some of the most difficult, demanding, and temperamental people in Hollywood. But I have never, in all my years in this industry, encountered anyone as unprofessional, disrespectful, and downright cruel as you've been today." He gestured toward the cameras. "And the beautiful thing is, it's all been recorded. Everyone watching this can see exactly who you really are when you think you have the power to destroy someone. They can see how you treat people when you disagree with them. They can see what your version of tolerance and inclusion actually looks like." Eric started walking toward the exit again, but called back over his shoulder. "Good luck explaining this one to your network executives, Joy. Something tells me they're not going to be too happy about losing sponsors over your little power trip." And with that, Eric Roberts walked off the set of The View, leaving behind a stunned audience, mortified co-hosts,